So, good afternoon, everyone. I can, oh, is it on? Okay, great. Yeah, hello, my name is Eleanor Main, and I'm a professor in the biology department and a very long-time member of WISE. And it's my really great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Laura Lautz, a former member of the Earth and Environmental Science Department here at SU. She's joined us for this WISE celebration. So Laura earned her PhD in 2005 from the Department of Earth Sciences here at SU, and after graduation she joined the faculty at SUNY ESF for 3 years and then returned to SU, where she was on the faculty in Earth Sciences for 11 years. During this time, Laura led a vibrant, well-funded research group in hydrology, and she received numerous awards, including the Fellow of the Geological Society of America in 2018, and the Chancellor's Citation for Faculty Excellence and Scholarly Distinction in 2019. Her research group addresses how hydrologic processes influence water quality and movement through watersheds. Laura is also well known at SU for her leadership of the Empower program, a graduate training program that bridged chemistry, engineering, and earth science to tackle issues in the water-energy nexus. In 2019, Laura and her family moved to Northern Virginia, where she is currently a hydrologic sciences program director at the National Science Foundation. And with an annual budget of approximately $12 million, the program supports research on continental water processes at all scales. Welcome back to SU, Laura, and a special WISE welcome to your daughter, who is also joining us today.
Can you guys hear me okay with this? I'm sure Sharon appreciates everyone drawing our attention to her up at the front table, so thank you for doing that. So hello, everyone. Thank you for the nice introduction. Good afternoon and welcome. It's wonderful for us, me and my daughter, to be back in Syracuse and reconnect with so many faculty, staff, and students. In addition to getting my PhD at Syracuse, I actually grew up in Syracuse, so this is a bit of a venture back to our hometown. I was born at Crouse Hospital, and I live just off Orvilleton Road on Lansdowne Road, if any of you know that area, right near the Shopping Town Mall. So I want to thank WISE so much for inviting me back to participate in this panel. Yeah, it's just such a pleasure to be here. And I'm very honored to be joined on stage by a really amazing and accomplished group of women and Syracuse University graduates, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And although we come from a very broad range of fields, which you'll hear about, from engineering to psychology to the earth sciences, and have very diverse professional and personal backgrounds, we do have something in common. We're all graduates of Syracuse University and have the shared experience of being part of the WISE community. For me, I first connected with WISE shortly after coming to Syracuse myself in 2002 as a PhD student in the Department of Earth Sciences, now the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences. Right around the time that the WISE program was getting its start 20 years ago, and I appreciate the historical context that Shobha presented in the prior presentation. And over the past 20 years as a doctoral student and an early career faculty member at SUNY ESF, and as later a tenured faculty member and department chair at Syracuse, I have continued to learn from and find a sense of community amongst the cohort of women faculty, staff, and students in WISE. And I'm, again, just grateful for the opportunity to return to Syracuse today to reflect on that experience. So I'm joined on the panel today by three very accomplished Syracuse and WISE alumni. We all met briefly over Zoom just a few days ago, and I was really blown away by their accomplishments. So I want to give them a brief introduction, but they're also going to have an opportunity to introduce themselves, and I hope they'll embellish a bit on my introduction, which I've tried to keep brief so that we could hear more from our panelists. So joining me on stage are Ariel Ash Shakur, who earned her PhD in 2017 in bioengineering at Syracuse, where she was also a National Science Foundation Research Fellow and an IGERT Fellow. And since earning her PhD, Ariel has worked as a program manager for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. She is an interventional cardiovascular device regulatory expert She reviews regulatory submissions for cardiovascular devices and is leading a study on diversity of enrollment in cardiovascular clinical trials. She also leads the inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Committee in the Office of Product Evaluation and Quality at the FDA. So Ariel and I both work for the federal government. Also joining me is Francielli, or Fran, Silva Genier, who will be completing her doctoral degree at Syracuse this coming May. She'll be awarded her PhD in chemical engineering. And her research is really interesting. It's focused in the area of material science, and specifically how we can design the next generation of rechargeable batteries to last longer and safer. And I know this is an area of really keen research interest at the federal level, so that's very exciting. Her work has been featured on the cover of Macromolecules, a high-impact journal of the American Chemical Society, and she's a recipient of the Syracuse University and GEM Fellowships. Last, but of course not least, joining me on stage is Kayla Wagner, who earned both her undergraduate and graduate degrees in the fields of psychology and clinical psychology at Syracuse. She's worked at Quadrant Biosciences, which is a biotech company, for the past 5 years, where she's had a number of roles. She's been the director and vice president for clinical research, vice president for product management, and is now the president of Autism Spectrum Disorder Diagnostic Products. She's an advocate of child-focused mental health and has led translational research that's resulted in new product development and commercialization for autism testing. And I will say also research translation, or actionable science, is also something very much of interest at the federal level. So welcome, Ariel, Fran, and Kayla, and thank you so much for being here on the panel. So to kick things off, I'd like to ask each of you to briefly reflect on your professional trajectory, maybe embellish on my introduction if you could, and the role that the WISE program has played in your experience at Syracuse and beyond. And so, Kayla, maybe you could start.
Sure. Hi. Oh, can you hear me okay? Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you so much to WISE for bringing this room of incredible people together. This is a very full room of exceptional women and allies, and so I'm really excited to be here today. I want to give you a little bit more about my story. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and tell you a little bit about my journey briefly. I grew up in a town that was very small and rural, probably about 3,000 people. I came here to Syracuse University first to receive my bachelor's degree. And most of my life has been somewhat expedited, and especially my career journey. So I graduated SU a year early, and that same year made a decision to start in the clinical psychology program, graduate program here at SU. That program is very unique in that it's a scientist practitioner model. So they trained us not only to be very analytical and focus on our research efforts, but to apply that to patients and to take on a clinical role. So while I was here at SU, I was doing that. I was a clinician practicing psychology for the community, the greater Syracuse area, and I learned a little bit about Quadrant Biosciences. Actually, someone left a publication on my desk with a sticky note on it. I don't know if we still use sticky notes anymore, but it said, you should really read this. And it was a publication written by folks at SUNY Upstate Medical University, just down the hill, focused on using saliva as a biofluid to diagnose autism. And I was very engaged in autism diagnostics myself. That's also the area of research that I focused in. And as Laura mentioned, I have a significant interest in translational research. So publications are wonderful. I love increasing knowledge. And I always wanted my journey, or my vision for myself, was to be sure that my research really impacted lives. So I joined Quadrant Biosciences first to lead our clinical research efforts. At that time, most of our research was within a spreadsheet. I think I was probably the 8th person hired. It was a very small team. It was a startup at that time. And since I changed roles quite a bit at Quadrant, and I led and implemented grant funding in excess of $5 million from the NIH. I transitioned over to the commercial side of the business mainly because I wanted to learn much more about all the pieces that really bring a product from an idea to something that affects lives, something that is tangible, and to the market. And so at this point, I lead all business aspects of our ASD Diagnostic business line. So I oversee everything from sales and marketing to operations and some regulatory pieces as well. I want to reflect a little bit about WISE and share some details with you all. I know that there are probably many undergraduate and graduate students in this room right now, and some of you submitted really great questions, which we're excited to talk more about. But I found WISE as a really unique opportunity for me, and I remember sitting in rooms like this, listening to other women who were very successful. And as I mentioned to you, I grew up in a very rural place, so there weren't many interactions that I had with other women that had a vision or a career in the way that I wanted mine to be. So I felt like interacting with the folks that were involved in WISE really allowed me to take time for that, allowed for a lot of introspection about myself and why and what my journey would entail. I was involved in the FPP program specifically, which meant that I also took time as a graduate student, which I know time is so limited as a graduate student, but I took time to think about my career goals, right? Establishing timelines. I remember going to a resume workshop, and I hadn't looked at my resume probably in months before that day, because, right, like I said, time is so limited. But you know, thinking about your timeline, your goals, and looking at why, right? What are the experiences that you've already had? Why did you choose to enroll in them? And being able to really concisely speak about that is something that you'll have to do forever. You'll have to do that when you apply to jobs. You'll have to do that in rooms with people, at least in the industry setting, but I'm sure in academia too, where they don't know you at all, right? And so you have to be able to describe who you are and how you got there. And so I feel like inspiration is a word that comes to mind for me when I think back about WISE and why I joined this program originally. I was very inspired by the women that I met.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ariel. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. I think you can hear me okay. So good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'd like to echo Kayla and Laura. Thank you for the introduction as well. It's so good to be back home and to see some of you all and to reconnect. It feels like I left yesterday or something. You just get back in, you see all the same faces, and it feels good. And that was one of the best parts about WISE, feeling like you had a family here and being able to come back anytime and seeing those people, the same people again. So one, thank you to those who coordinated this event and all the work and effort that went behind it, and for gathering this group of accomplished and powerful women and allies. As far as the introduction, I'll just try to keep it a little bit brief because I think, Laura, you did a really great job summarizing everything. For me, I'm from Maryland, from the suburbs of DC. I went to the University of Maryland in College Park for my undergraduate degree in bioengineering. And then I actually did a one-year research fellowship at the FDA, and that's what sparked my interest in returning. But I did a one-year internship at the FDA in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories, where I did work on drug-coated balloons and drug-eluting stents. So again, it was a full circle moment when I came back. But after the one-year internship, that really helped establish my confidence in pursuing a PhD program and knowing that I could do research full-time. And so I was looking for different programs, and I actually stumbled upon the NSF Eigert Fellowship that was available at Syracuse University, and I think my first point of contact was Dr. Marchetti. And I happened to Google or see that the NSF IGRIT Fellowship was available here, and that was one of the many reasons that attracted me to the university. And then once I came here with WISE and so many other support groups and systems, it felt immediately like this was the place that I wanted to be. So I joined Syracuse University as a PhD student in bioengineering. I finished in 2017, and then I had the choice between a postdoc or returning to the government at the FDA, and I decided for many reasons to go back to the FDA, and now I am a lead reviewer and biomedical engineer in the Interventional Cardiovascular Devices Group, where I approve stents and drug-coated balloons and atherectomy devices, as well as clinical trials. And as Laura mentioned, I won't go into any more detail than that because we've spent quite a time on introductions, but I want to go back to WISE and what it really meant for me. And so WISE for me was, as I mentioned earlier, it created a sense of belonging and invaluable opportunities to connect with women in the field in STEM fields, as well as networking opportunities. So we were able to, connect with these women at coffee hours or at luncheons and learn their experiences, how they navigated through their careers. There were so many workshops for writing and negotiations, and those were, I use them in my career now, and they're incredibly invaluable and useful resources that the WISE program provided. So I will end there, and thank you again.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I wanted to also echo your words. Also, it's a great privilege to be sitting here. I remember being in my first year in PhD, attending these events and being inspired by so many of you, and now having the opportunity to talk about my experience is a great privilege. So I grew up in Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil. The first time I came to Syracuse was in 2014. I came as an undergrad for a year abroad. So the Brazilian government had a program where we could go to another country and learn the language and have that experience. So I ended up in Syracuse. I saw snow for the first time, and I really liked because I came back. So at the time, I had the opportunity to work for a brief period of time with who is now my advisor, Dr. Hossein, and then from that experience, I could go back to Brazil, finish my studies, and come back for the PhD in chemical engineering. I want to thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and just add that, as we were saying, I am almost done, almost ready to graduate this semester. And as I reflect back in the role that WISE had in my in all those graduate years, I can definitely pinpoint experiences that I had that really changed the trajectory of my studies. One shout out I want to give to Dr. Elizabeth Palais. So she gives an amazing writing workshop that I attended twice. And as an international student, English is not my first language, so that was definitely very, very helpful in guiding me on what is considered a good scientific writing in America. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And so many other events that really helped me shape the scientist that I want to be and that I am becoming today. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for those introductions and reflections on WISE. It's clear to me there's a theme in your reflections about WISE providing a sense of community. Kayla used the word inspiration and meeting other women working in STEM spaces. And so I think I'll direct my first question to Ariel. You're out in the real world, I guess. We're out in the real world, right? We are. And I'm wondering, given the role that finding community and whys at Syracuse played in your time as a graduate student, what strategies have you used, or how have you come to find similar communities or allies in your professional world?
Great question, Laura. So for me, I had to stick my neck out there. I had to make those connections because we don't have the same system necessarily at the FDA. I'm actually currently in the process of creating a employee resource group, which would be women in science and engineering or women of color in STEM. We haven't decided that part yet, but we're likely going to start that up at the FDA thanks to, the example that I saw here. I now have a framework of how we could go about doing that, and I know, what types of events and things would be important for the women at the FDA, and that's what we need, because when I started at the FDA, we didn't have that. And so what I did instead is I joined the FDA mentoring group, and I specifically requested a mentor who was also a woman of color, so I could know how to navigate through certain situations, how to ask for promotions and things like that. So you might have to, in your careers, for the students who are here today, you might have to go out and find that person and create those networks and then build on that. Also, by volunteering for the center level diversity, equity, inclusion program, I was then able to meet and network with women who are at the center level, who are accomplished at the FDA, and now that network has grown exponentially. So by pursuing things that I enjoy doing and seeing the examples from the past, from Syracuse, from WISE, I went to the FDA, found those smaller networks or a few examples of women, and then built my network from there. So now I have a direct line of connection to the office director for product evaluation and quality, and that person can then connect me to other women and women scientists and engineers at the FDA. So really it was learning what it is already out there, and then finding people and building upon that and building that network.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ariel. And it seems like that's something that's even more important and can even be more challenging with working from home. I know that I haven't been to the NSF building in over 2 years, and finding that sense of community can actually be really challenging when working all over the country with your colleagues. So my next question, so I hope you all are gathering that this is a very successful group of women that I'm speaking with. It's really impressive accomplishments in their respective fields. And so my next question is related to Ariel's comments on finding a sense of community, but maybe even going further with how you continue to advocate for yourself as a woman and a woman of color in STEM spaces, and how you've also been able to advocate for others in that context. And so, Fran, maybe you can provide some feedback on that question.
Sure, thank you for the question. I think one way that I have been working on advocating for myself is to shut down any thoughts of, imposter syndrome. That's something that I'm sure a lot of us had to deal with in our careers. And that's definitely something that I try to work on. And I remember hearing the term for the first time in a WISE event, and really identifying. And I think that's really important because sometimes that can stop us from advocating for ourselves and for others. Another way is to negotiate, sometimes, especially right now, I'm entering the workplace, and you might feel that any opportunity that you get is the best opportunity, and really being able to negotiate and to understand what your needs are and, find a middle ground, that's, I think, is very important. And a way to advocate for others, I think, like Ariel said, it's very important to find community and also be welcoming to those who are arriving after us. like I said, I'm still in the lab, but I can already do that with new students that arrive and they're starting, and maybe I know things that I had to find out myself because of the time that I was or the type of research that I did. So being able to share the knowledge and how to develop certain skills with those who are arriving, that I think is a great way to advocate for others and also to create relationships with those in our workspace.
Thanks. Thank you, Fran. Building on that, I think there's advocating for yourself and, of course, advocating for your colleagues, and as you mentioned, those kind of coming in after you in whatever program or space that you're working. And then there's also dealing with challenges that you might face. So my next question is, what are some of the challenges that you have navigated with colleagues, and what skills seem to be the best for addressing those challenges? And maybe we can hear from Kayla.
Sure. Okay, so thinking about this piece, two things come to mind. The first is people will challenge your knowledge. There are times when I am in a room with all men, and there will be times when you all are in a room with all men. And I think remaining assertive and confident in your approach, but also empowering each other is super important to overcome this, right? There was a recent, just to provide a quick story or example, there was a recent situation in which I joined a call via Zoom. We were speaking with, I think there were at least 15 men in the room, and there was one other woman who was a colleague of mine sitting in the room. I joined via Zoom, and she reached under the table and texted to me, I'm so glad that you are here with me to represent women in science today. And I think that's really powerful, right? Because just saying that and supporting each other overcame probably thoughts we might have had that day about, or our confidence, or thoughts we were having about ourselves, or how we were going to respond, or what other people might have been thinking about us. And I think that's super important. The second piece, really quickly, is communication. Communication continues to be something that I focus a lot on, just because as a female in a leadership role in science, I feel that sometimes, you have to push people to be efficient, you have to hit deadlines, you have to pay attention to timelines, and you have to be messaging all of that, right? And there's a wide variety of personalities that you meet every single day or that are part of your team. At Quadrant, we have over 170 staff members. So the rule that I go by to sort of overcome the challenge difficulty is always the 80-20 rule. I don't know if anybody else knows about this rule in the room, but I try to listen 80% of the time and speak 20% of the time. And in psychology, I know there's other psychologists in the room. There was a pretty important study published by the American Psychological Association showing that when you're administering treatment as a psychologist or as a therapist, what is the strongest indicator of outcomes, positive outcomes, right? What motivates people to actually make change for themselves and to improve? The biggest piece there is the therapeutic relationship. It's actually potentially more important than any treatment you're actually implementing. It's more important than what type of treatment you choose. And so when you're out in the workplace, when you're working with your colleagues and you're motivating people, thinking about remaining aligned, thinking about your rapport with them is probably one of the most important pieces to success, I think. So that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Kayla there. Some of the challenges that I've experienced are similar, in which it's the people skills, knowing when to say something and how to say it, communication, the interpersonal skills, taking the training that you need, leadership training, or conflict resolution training. That's been one of the bigger challenges that I've run into. We're constantly working with companies and with a team of people, of experts. And what do you do when two experts disagree and you're the one leading the project? How do you navigate that situation? And that's something that, as a PhD student, you might not have learned. I think with WISE and some of their workshops, we did learn that, the communication aspect, and how to be a strong voice in a room as a woman. So I know, at my job now at the FDA, when I'm leading projects, I'm confident regardless of who's in the room, though it is intimidating when you are, one of two women in the room for a project. But I feel like WISE helped me create that confidence to where I know, what I bring to this team. I know what my expertise is. I'm gonna, we're gonna accomplish this goal. That's what this meeting is for. And if it were not for WISE and seeing those examples of women through the networking events, then I don't know if I could say that I would, be able to handle imposter syndrome the way that I can now. Mm-hmm. At this point, I'm not worried about it. As a PhD student, sure, but I think WISE gave me that foundation to be able to combat that. So yeah, those are the challenges, some of the challenges, and how I navigate them.
Agree. Because I had the opportunity to be part of the WISE, and because I had opportunity with fellowships, for example, then I could be part of the Women of Color in STEM, be a mentor, and I could learn a lot, especially being a woman of color in my field. It's not, sometimes we don't see a lot of representation, so that was definitely a challenge that being part of the WISE community helped me understand, that some of the things that sometimes we go through are not just with us, that other people go through, and then we can understand and try to solve those issues and overcome them, and really be able to focus on the work and on the science. So I think that's a challenge that is always going to be part of our trajectory, but that we can find in others the skills and the strength to keep going.
Thank you. Those are all great comments. I, at the risk of moving from facilitator to co-panelist, maybe I'll add just a couple of things, because so many things you said resonated with me. It's actually been a really interesting experience to work at the National Science Foundation after a very long time in academia, because I have found for the first time that I'm often in spaces that are predominantly women, if not all women, and that has been I didn't realize how kind of shocking that would be to the system. It's great, So there are spaces where women do dominate in STEM, and for whatever reason, at the National Science Foundation, in the division in which I work, that's the case. And sometimes we're actually seeking out men to serve on committees because they're all women. So that's been an interesting experience. But I think what surprised me is how much I noticed it. You know what I mean? I don't think I really paid that much attention to being in male-dominated spaces. I was aware of it, but I just was sort of used to navigating it. I grew up with all brothers. I felt comfortable in male-dominated settings, I think, sometimes. And it was almost just interesting to think, wow, I've never been in a space like this before. And then you also mentioned the challenge with communication, and I was thinking, it feels somewhat easy internally at NSF for conversation, but one of my jobs is reviewing grant proposals and unfortunately declining a lot of grant proposals. It's an unfortunate reality, and having to get on the Zoom call, get on the phone, Zoom, with a disappointed PI who might be really disappointed and actually really challenging your authority and your content knowledge. And those can be really difficult conversations. So having that confidence you mentioned in your own content knowledge and your authority and confidence in your decision making. But I've also found, like, when I'm in meetings and panels or other meetings with other NSF program officers and outside experts, just thinking about that experience, I do try to often talk about my colleagues' accomplishments, my fellow NSF program officers, introducing them as content experts, not as program managers, not that there's anything wrong with being a program manager, but kind of reaffirming that they have, the credentials and expertise to try to kind of counteract maybe what I think is some implicit bias that sometimes comes into those conversations. So that's something to think about, is how you can kind of introduce your colleagues in the way that you would hope that you would be introduced as well. So thank you for those great comments. We have about 5 minutes left, so I think I will, and I have one more question. We could do a couple questions, but I think you could all answer this, and it's a good, maybe a positive one to think about. And that is, of course, so this, I've mentioned what an amazing group of women are up here on stage, and so, all this communicating and advocating and finding community can be challenging, it can be tiring, it can make you, it adds additional stress. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you recharge yourself. You after putting yourself in so many different spaces, how do you make time for yourself as you also deal with the challenges and opportunities you already spoke about? So whoever would like to start.
I can start this one, sure. I think that in this question, it's really about making yourself a priority. And I know that sounds really simple, but you are the priority, right? So even as a graduate student, undergraduate student, we often have so many competing priorities. There's only so much time in a day, right? But doing things every single day that bring you joy is so cleansing and is so recharging. And then the other piece is celebrating your successes just as much as you would celebrate others. I think oftentimes we forget to do that, right? Like, we wrote this huge proposal and then we submit it and nobody says anything. Or like, we prepared for this lecture that we have coming up and we finish it and we're like, awesome, okay, that was cool. But like, seriously, like, give yourself space to really pat yourself on the back and celebrate your successes, right? When our friends do amazing things or our family members do amazing things, we're like there with the cake, ready to celebrate. You have to do that for yourself too. I think that's super recharging.
Yeah, for me, it's been a struggle, honestly. I'm going to have a moment of transparency. In the first few years of my career, I was like, I need to work hard and I need to, I shouldn't say prove myself, but I was, as a first-generation professional, I was worried about taking time off to the point where I would be sick, and I'm still working. I have a fever of 100 degrees, and this was, I think, last summer. I had happened to get salmonella, and I was still working. I was, leading the meetings, and it was tough. And it was hitting that level when I was like, first of all, you can't make a good business decision with a fever of 100 degrees. It was hitting that moment of, I shouldn't say rock bottom, but that moment of a significant health issue that I was like, what are you doing, Ariel? You need to make yourself a priority, and you have to take time off. So take your mental health days, take your sick leave, take your annual leave, whatever. I also like to kind of start my day maybe with opening the window and sitting by the window, looking outside, having that kind of calming environment. Sometimes I listen to ASMR, actually videos while I'm working, which is kind of weird, or other YouTube videos, the breathing techniques. I'll do that sometimes even in the middle of the day because it just gets so stressful sometimes. After a very stressful meeting, I'll walk away from the computer because now we're working from home. But I have to build that into my work schedule. Otherwise, I'm glued to the computer for 8 hours. I'm not even taking lunch. I'll eat an orange for lunch or something. And it was hard. It was difficult. It's still a little bit challenging, honestly. But I'll light a candle. Maybe I'll get my nails done or something on the weekend. Every now and then, connecting with my friends and family, making sure I have time for that. But really just, making yourself a priority and making sure to build in breaks in your schedule and in your weeks have helped me a lot.
Yeah, I agree with what has been said. I'm still in the mode of graduate student, so it's hard sometimes to not think about work because it's something that's so close to you. It's why you've been working for all these years. You put your heart into it. So I think what I try to do is to have time that I'm not thinking about it and I'm enjoying maybe dinner with friends, with my partner, or I'm watching TV, you know, just having that time that you're not thinking about science, because once you come back to the work, you're recharged and you're focused, and then you can be even more productive. But like having that time that maybe it can be a few minutes during the day, it can be, you know, one day at a week, depending on what is your workflow at that time, but really having that time for you that you can just think about whatever else, but not your work, so when you come back, you're much more productive. Yeah.
Thank you. See, that was a good note to leave on, because I'm thinking we should all go out and celebrate after this. We did our panel, light a candle, you know, put on some good music. So with that, I unfortunately, our time is up. I really enjoyed this conversation. So before we actually leave the stage, can you join me in thanking our panelists, Ariel Ash Shakur, Kayla Wagner, and Silva Genier. Thank you. So according to my instructions, I believe we will now take a quick break, and then we will return in just a few minutes to hear Dr. Christina Marchetti speak. Thank you.